Hello there, my name is Pastor Buck Wilford. I'm the pastor here at Brunswick Community Church. We're located right in the Rito's Bakery Plaza at 1930 Pearl Road. We have church at 10 a.m. on Sundays and Bible study at 6:30 p.m. on Thursdays. We also have good Christian education hour at 9 a.m. Sundays if you want to come a little early. We're a church that loves people and we love God. We'd love to connect with you. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to just be a part of your life as well too. We're focused in on preaching the Bible. I do it verse by verse, expository style. We hold to the 5 solas. We believe strongly that we're saved only by grace alone, through faith alone, through Christ alone. And it's all to the glory of God alone. And the only thing we hold as infallible and inerrant and strongly adhere to is the scriptures alone. We'd love to see you out here. We'd love to have you come visit. Thank you so much.
Savior me, and did my sovereign die? Would he devote that sacred head for such a worm as I? At the cross where I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart rolled away, it was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. Was it all crimes that I had done? He groaned upon the tree. Amazing pity, grace unknown, and love beyond degree. At the cross where I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart rolled away, it was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. Like the sun in darkness high, and shut his glories in, and Christ Almighty Maker died for man the creature's sin. At the cross where I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart rolled away, it was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. Might I hide my blushing face while his dear cross appears? Dissolve my heart in thankfulness and melt my eyes to tears. At the cross where I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart rolled away, it was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. The drops of grief can never repay the debt of love I owe. Dear Lord, I give myself away, 'tis all that I can do. At the cross where I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart rolled away, it was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. It was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day.
Thank you, Jesus. All right, let's go to 272, 272. 272.
to death. Life is mine to live, won through your selfless love. This the power of the cross, Son of God, slain for us. What a love, what a cost, we stand forgiven at the cross. What a love, what a cost, we stand forgiven at the
So sorry that I don't have my.
So sorry I don't have my nice slideshow up here for you. I'll get that fixed by next week. I'm not a technical guy, but I do get things going. It's disappointed this thing's not right today. All right, but I would have had a cool picture for you today, okay? I found a picture because, a lot of folks name this passage the frustrations of pleasure. And on the picture I had, I think it's some type of famous painting, is a man and a woman with like burlap sacks over their head or pillowcases or however you picture it, trying to kiss. But they can't really kiss because, there's stuff over their heads right there. And that's the frustrations of pleasure. And I thought that really did kind of capture this passage and capture the true frustrations of pleasure. That it's like the beginning chapters we preached, that we are never satisfied. There is never satisfaction. The humankind, we're always looking for a little more, something more. It's never enough. And if that's how we try to live our lives, if that's the search we have, in the end, we'll find we never found the answer. We never got to the end. We were never satisfied. And that's the terrible way of trying to basically replace the creation with the Creator. Every one of these passages, I bring it to the end with Jesus Christ. That's where the answer is, and that's where true hope, true satisfaction, true joy is found in each and every day, is in Jesus Christ. If we try to replace it with something else, we're never going to find the answer. And in these passages like this one, King Solomon, who was the wisest man who ever lived, and I believe he was the end of his life after he already kind of fell with the 1,000 wives and letting some of them have their pagan worship temples and things in the kingdom and stuff like that. I believe this was after all that, and this is the old man's wisdom that was a wise man all his life, come to grips with reality and realize that all this stuff the world can offer is nothing without Christ. With Christ we have everything. Without Christ we have absolutely nothing. And I wrote down here, after he tested wisdom and found out that its contribution was limited because it had the power to increase human suffering, but not the power to change reality. So the more you know, it said in the last passages we preached, the more you suffer, the more trouble you have, the more smart you are about how things are in life, the sadder you are because you realize how bad a place we live in, how broken reality is, and how much trouble there is. But he turned next to pleasure to see what depths of meaning he could find in that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I have a thing, I'm not going to sing it, but I'll try to sing it. Remember this song? I can't get no satisfaction. You remember that? It was a Mick Jagger song, okay? Mick Jagger sang that. And that lines right up with this passage right here. It lines up with a lot of Ecclesiastics. And it's a sad thing. I think Mick Jagger is like in his late 60s now or something. He's still singing that song if he sings it. Huh? 70s even. And he's still singing that song if he's singing it, And isn't that sad? A man that's gone into his 70s and lived all the rock star life and he still can't get no satisfaction. And isn't that the truth of it? That's the truth. The pursuit of happiness has led to an epidemic of depression. People always wanting to be happy have found themselves to be so depressed because they think, well, I wish I had something that would make me happy. I wish I could find something. Oh my, woe is me. Why is everything so bad? And it's led to more depression is what the pursuit of happiness has led to in our world. The pursuit of pleasure without boundaries ends up in misery without boundaries. You know, if you keep searching, and you could have examples of, say, sexual revolution that we have going on, and how in the 80s we had AIDS breaking out and people all dying in terrible ways and things. And you could just go in all kinds of ways that if you have pursuit of pleasure with no boundaries, you will have a misery without boundaries. And then Woody Allen, he was a funny fella, but he confessed once that he thought of suicide every single day of his life. And if you think Woody Allen is a funny guy, that's something that he personally confessed and said to somebody. Every single day of his life he thought about suicide. So even in like humor and different things, it's not where the end all of end alls is. It's only in Jesus. Ernest Hemingway, he wrote this novel called Old Man in the Sea. I never read it, but maybe some people here have read it. All right, and in the novel, it's like a picture of his own life, is what it really was in the end. And in the novel, he pulls up this huge shark, or a huge fish, and as he's pulling it up, he found out that most of the fish had been eaten by sharks before he got it in. And isn't that the way too? Like we try to pursue our pleasure, we try to get all these things we want to have, and then we find out it's not as good as what we thought it was. You know, imagine you're pulling in the biggest fish. You know, I've been hearing a lot about mackerel, I think is the right name for fishing. And they just talk about how amazing they are. Imagine you're trying to catch a mackerel and you pull in this big 5 foot, 3 foot fish, whatever size they are, when you pull it in and it's half eaten by some shark and stuff. You'd be like, man. But that's the way it is. And then guess what happened to Ernest Hemingway in the end? He killed himself. He died by suicide. That's how Ernest Hemingway died. So it's just like that with the same as the old man in the sea. You know, trying to get everything you can and then finding out it's never enough. It never satisfies. It's not where the end is found. All right, now let's start my first verse. You'd see Ecclesiastes 2:1 up there, okay? If you got your Bibles, that's right, Ecclesiastes 2:1. And you would also see, I finally got the Legacy Standard Bible on digits. So now I've changed my version that I'm preaching out of to Legacy Standard Bible. I believe it's the most word-for-word Bible in the English language today. All right, and I'm not a King James only guy, and it's not because I think that the King James is not the most correct. I don't think the King James is the most correct. I think the most word-for-word language Bible today is the Legacy Standard Bible. Before this, last week I was preaching at the NASB 95. I think that was the most word for word. There's some that are very word. King James is up there too. It's in word for word, but it's sometimes hard to understand, and I have to preach more to interpret that than I do the regular text. So that's why I don't preach the King James. But Legacy Standard's beautiful. And if you want a Legacy Standard Bible, there's a thing called John 3:16 Publishers. They're the ones making it. And it is growing. It's getting out there, and it's scholarly as well too. Very scholarly. But it says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with gladness, so that you shall see good things, and behold, it too was vanity. So he checked himself in his own heart, and he said, you know what? I'm going to test to see if gladness is what it's all about in this life. Is it about happiness? Is it about doing that with good things? And in the end, he said it was all vanity. All right, the point of the test is to find out whether pleasure is good as it is cracked up to be. And especially to answer the question, will I find more satisfaction in pleasure than in wisdom? And in the end, it wasn't all that apparent. You know, that between wisdom didn't bring him all the pleasure, no matter how much knowledge and wisdom he had. And also, we'll see that pleasure isn't all that it's cracked up to be either. And it's going to be empty as well. Verse 2, it says, I said of laughter, it is madness, and of gladness, what does it do? You know, in the end, what does it do? And he said pointed out basically it has a temporary lure, but a negative conclusion. All right, so the stuff will temporarily lure you in, but in the end, you don't find peace, you don't find wholeness. And The novelty is always replaced by another, and it always wears off, no matter what, you know. I tell you, you know, some folks, they have different hobbies, different things you like, you know. I can tell you, one of my hobbies, hopefully I don't freak everybody out, is guns. I like guns, okay? I was in the Army 20 years, and I liked them when I was a kid. I loved them even more in the Army. I was a Special Forces weapons sergeant, even one of my jobs in the Army. And I knew about guns, and I got guns, and then as time went on, those guns became old guns. The new guns came, and I thought, oh, I want to have these new guns. This is just old stuff, you know, and it always just keeps getting replaced, you know. And they really, I think I pointed out one of these sermons that, you know, nothing new under the sun. Somebody to throw rocks, really a machine gun throwing bullets isn't much different than that. It's just a more modern way of throwing rocks right there, you know, at things. And it's going to keep going in the future like that. And nothing truly satisfies. All these novelties wear off, and it's not the same as before, except for one thing, Jesus Christ. Faith in God. Your faith, that is the most important thing of all. Ecclesiastes 2:3 says, I explored with my heart how to stimulate my body with wine, while my heart was guiding me wisely, and how to seize simple-minded folly, until I could see where is this good for the sons of men and what they do under heaven the few days of their lives. So he drank some wine, you know, tried to feel good drinking wine. Some people, they think, oh, I'll just drink some wine, it feels so fine. And what is that song? Wine, 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 red, red wine. I mean, you remember all these songs and stuff? And I tell you, it's not as popular today as it was a little while ago in my life. But you think about that, and people try to find these things, and they may find pleasure for a time, you know, for a little bit of time while they're drinking or something. But then they get a headache. Then they realize they made some bad decisions. They make some shame of themselves or something they feel bad about. They realize maybe they drank so much wine, they got lazy, and they didn't do the work, and now they're poor. You know, all kinds of troubles can happen right there, you know, with too many things. I look at wine and alcohol as like self-medication. So I myself don't self-medicate at all, okay, with wine or alcohol. But I don't say that everybody has to. You know, the Bible talks about it. It says one day we'll drink wine with Jesus in heaven. I'm not going to deny that wine in heaven. When Jesus gives me wine, I'll say, yes, Lord, whatever he gives me, okay? But for myself, I want to try to enjoy my life as much as I can, even though there is a lot of miserable stuff too. I don't want to be medicated through the few good things that are there as well. You know, so that's how I look at it. But he tried this. He tried it all. And he also tried to see what is just simple-minded folly. Like, what's just light fun? You know, what are these things? And he tried to see what it was. And he tried to see what everybody does in the few days that they live. And truly, we really do only live few days. I heard it a long time ago, and I checked it. It was pretty close to accurate. Maybe it's a little different today. I don't know. But they said, a fellow once said that the average human being lives for 25,000 days. That's like 70-some years. Think about that. That doesn't seem like that big of a number at all. 25,000 days, and that's it for you, you know. It almost seems like you got to check it. When I heard that, I had to check it. I thought, there's no way I'm only living for 25,000 days. And that's on average. Some people live less than that. Maybe some may go to 40,000 days or something. I don't know how many 40,000 days would be. Maybe that's too many. But think about it. That doesn't seem like that much at all. You know. And then even worse, see how many days you've already lived to this point. You know. I know I've already lived like 15,000 days or something. You know, or between 10 and 15. I don't know any more than that. You know. There's quite a few days I've already lived. Yeah, even more maybe, so I don't know. But here's the thing. Here's the thing with these 25,000 days is it's a few days of our lives and that's it. And the pleasure heightens all our senses. You know, truly, people that just live in the here and the now, the only thing they live for is to see, to hear, to touch, to feel, just their senses, their five senses, and that's it. And it heightens the senses, and guess what happens? Eventually it doesn't heighten those senses anymore. They got to have more, because that's not enough, all right? And Solomon tested this view by abandoning himself to pleasure to see if that was what life was about. And let me tell you that he abandoned himself to pleasure, okay? He was a rich man. He had 1,000 women, okay? 700 wives, 300 concubines, you know? You know, think about a lot of, maybe you ladies are like, this is horrible, but some men may think, oh my, who caught up with pleasure. But he didn't find pleasure in that. That wasn't enough. It did not bring him pleasure in the end. So like I said, anybody that thinks just a little more, if I just had this or just had that, the answer is no, it wouldn't be enough. And it wouldn't satisfy. That's the answer. That's really what Ecclesiastes is showing us. It's not about a little more or a little this or a little that. It'll never be like that. Okay? So that's what happened. And truly, what does pleasure do? It lifts us above the routine. Okay? Maybe even think about if you got like a diet going on and you have like a special day of the week or once in a while that you're just going to splurge and eat some cake. This cake's pretty good stuff right there. Or you're gonna do something like that and you look forward to it, and what does it do? How does it bring you pleasure? Because it breaks you out of the routine. Okay? Brings you out of the routine. It'd be like shrimp. Oh, I love eating some shrimp, but I don't get to have shrimp every day, But think about eating some good seafood or something. It's something special, and that pleasure gets you out of the routine. And that's where pleasure kind of gets us. But you can search down that path, and I bet you if I ate shrimp every day for a month, I'd be like, I never want to have another shrimp again in my life. I've had enough shrimp, I like steak. Steak's one of my favorite things. I love to have steak. But if I eat steak every single day, I bet I'd be like, I'm just so tired of eating this steak. Maybe I'd even become a vegetarian or something for a while if I eat so much steak. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know. But I'm just saying that pleasure gets us out of the routine of things, and that's where we usually find pleasure, something that brings us out of the routine. Okay, verse 4, he says, I made my works great. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. Now, think about this. He lived in Israel, and Israel wasn't a place of like natural waterways and things like that. It was kind of like the desert. I've never been there. Some folks here have been there. I've never got to go. I hope I do get to go one day before I die. But I know one day I'll be in heaven, and my end time view is one day I will get to go to Jerusalem. but we'll see. But here's the thing is he built houses and he planted vineyards, and maybe some of you may relate to this. I know Mike. I've seen pictures on Mike's Facebook. I've heard him talk about it. Mike has got beautiful gardens. He grows stuff. He's got plants. He's got flowers, all kinds of stuff. It's just gorgeous. It's the way his yard works, and it's so wonderful. And this is what he did as well, too. He built all this wonderful stuff to find his peace in this stuff. But in the end, it wasn't enough for him. It wasn't enough. But it's not to say those things are bad in and of themselves, but if that's all your hope is for, if that's where you think you'll find all your peace, you'll find it comes short, and you won't find that no matter what that is. But here's something else. If you look at 1 Kings 7:1 and also 1 Kings 7:1, it says that King Solomon took 13 years for his house to be built. 13 years. That's how long it said. I mentioned this last week, but I didn't have the verses. I got it this week. 13 years to build his house. And that's on taxpayer money. Okay, this wasn't. This wasn't something that he worked hard for. He was the king, and he did tax people quite a bit. Later, if you keep reading the Bible, his kids say the people are grumbling and they're so mad, and they're like, you're going to relieve us some taxes, relieve us some stuff. And unfortunately, the elderly people say, yes, you need to do this. And the younger folks tell the young king, no. Tell them it's going to be so much worse for you than it was with my dad. And guess what? The kingdom splits, and it never ever comes back together again from them. So he did have some heavy-duty taxes, but he built these giant houses for himself. It took 13 years with probably the best people that could be crafty construction guys. And then he also took 7 years to build the temple of God. And that's in 1 Kings 6:38, which is kind of sad if you think about that. The temple was almost half the time built as what his own house was built. You think the temple for all of Israel should have the bigger focus than his personal house would have. But he did this. It says in that verse 4, I made my works great, and he built houses for himself. And the temple was incredible. It's something still talked about today. I mean, it was just incredible, the Temple of Solomon right there. And I'm sure his house was incredible too. And I'm sure the vineyards were incredible, okay? Then he says in verse 5, I made for myself gardens and parks, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. And once again, if you're somebody that likes gardens and things like that and working in your yard, think of the beauty of all these things, okay? I planted like 12 fruit trees in my yard. When I came back here from the Army, we only have, I think, 3 of them still alive. Unfortunately, the clay and the water issue just didn't make those trees thrive in our backyard. And even the ones I have, I still don't get fruit off them to eat really. And when I mow the lawn, sometimes I'll grab an apple off that one that's, you know, got to look for where there's no worms or something. That's why I eat one little apple while I'm driving around the lawn mowing it. But some of them don't even bloom, you know. The pear tree doesn't even, they say they get a little bit there and they're hard and then they fall off and they're dead. And I'm like, it's never soft enough to eat those pears. So, but think some folks do get this. Imagine making a beautiful garden or park, okay, and bring all kinds of beautiful fruit trees in. All right, and trees are always beautiful and wonderful. You think about trees sometimes outlast us. You know, when you plant a tree, you can think about that tree and think this tree is going to live longer than I'm going to live. And that's just kind of a fascinating thought to think about. You know, I look at some trees sometimes in America and right here in our area, and I think, did an Indian one day rest his head against this tree 300-400 years ago? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there were some big trees around, and you think, how long have they been around for? It's kind of fascinating. It's longer than us. Verse 6 says, I made for myself pools of water from which to water a forest of growing trees. Now this is some serious technology and some serious wisdom. You know, think about this, that he had to bring in this water to water all this stuff, because it was like a desert environment. You know, we actually live in a beautiful environment. Oh, I lived in Colorado once for 4 years, and I remember when I came back to Ohio, I thought, wow, look at all the green. Did I forget about the green here? There it's just brown. Unless you use a ton of water, everything is brown. All right, it just turns to dirt. You know, all the people's houses, you got to water your yard a lot. Here, I never water my yard, and it's always green. Okay, I know some people water their yard here, but that's because you got fancy grass and it's got to get all the special stuff. If you let just the wild stuff grow here, it stays green. Okay, sure, there's tons of weeds, but it's green. That's what I'm concerned about green. Okay, but this in King Solomon's day, as he was the king, he wasn't about me with having weeds in yards and stuff. I bet his stuff was just beautiful and amazing and gorgeous. And yet it still wasn't enough. It didn't satisfy him. And then he says in verse 7, I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. So he had tons of slaves, all right, which is a terrible thing, you know, a terrible thing. We read it just recently that somewhere in the Bible we read it. I think it was in the book of Revelation is where it was, that, you know, these slaves have a soul. You know, slaves have a soul. They're human beings. So we shouldn't treat people like property and things. But there was those things that went on like that. And think about it, there were rules by God in the Old Testament for slaves. A slave was never to be a slave longer than 7 years. That was it, unless the slave voluntarily wanted to stay as a slave. But not everybody followed all these rules, and it was tough for slaves. We read just in Jeremiah recently in my daily Bibles that God told them to let go of all their slaves before he's like bringing the end of time to that nation about. And what did they do? They let them go, and then they took them all back and made them slaves again. And just horrible, you know. But that's where sin leads us there. Also, he says he possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded him in Jerusalem. And if you read 1 Kings 4:22 to 23, that's where he talks about having 700 wives and 300 concubines. And concubines is kind of like a female slave for a man there. Okay, it's a secondary, less than wife type of picture is what it is. It's not good. Okay, it was sin. What is sin? What is marriage supposed to be? We see it in Genesis 2:24. One man and one woman. And that's the way it was always supposed to be. So all these guys, even the wisest of men, King Solomon, sinned greatly in some of these areas, okay? And people today sin greatly when they don't recognize marriage as just one man and one woman. And Jesus also said this in Matthew 19 for all these critics that try to say, well, Jesus never said anything about that. He sure did. He referenced Genesis 2:24, one man, one woman. And now we go into Ecclesiates 8. It says, also I collected from myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of the sons of men, many concubines. Okay? And, you know, that probably is the real word men, not ladies. Okay? For many concubines. And And what did he do? He had personal wealth and he had sensual pleasure. All right, and it's 1 Kings 11:3 is what it says. I forget what the 4:22 to 23 says. I mentioned before, but 1 Kings 11:3 says 700 wives, 300 concubines. And I looked up the definition of a concubine. It says it's less than a wife. That's what a concubine is, and they still exist today. Believe it or not, there are Asian cultures that still have concubines. So you could be a rich Asian. I don't know if this is like China or where it means in Asia, but I looked it up, and they still people who have concubines. It's a terrible type of way. I seen myself one time. I seen in Kosovo, and it's Muslim folks there mostly, and I seen a fella who had 4 wives, and we got to know that fella, and I could notice with my own eyes that his 4th wife was kind of like the slave. You know, she had to go get the bread. She had to do this. She did all the work. And the first wife, the head wife, she was like the queen, okay? She didn't do so much as what the 4th wife did right there. So I could see as you go farther east than there, concubines and things would get even worse. But those kind of things went on, and this is what he did. He had gold, he had treasure, silver, he had all kinds of things. In verse 9 he says, "Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me." So he was like the man, all right? Think about the book of Job. In the book of Job, he says he was the greatest man of the East. There was nobody greater than Job. Job had a lot of wealth. Job had a lot of animals. Job had a lot of everything. And he says that he became great. I bet he had more than Job had in his day. Job's day was far before King Solomon's day, during the time of Abraham, likely. But he had all this stuff. But one thing that's interesting too in verse 9, he says, "And my wisdom also stood by me." So as he got older, he didn't lose his wisdom. That's precious, isn't it? We hope the same thing too. As we get older, the good things we learn, our wisdom, that we don't lose it, we continue to have our wisdom. And he said his wisdom stood by him. So he had great achievements, all right? And in all these achievements, he didn't find the satisfaction in the achievements either. All these things that he did, there wasn't, in his status, as him being like this greatest man, such a great man in Jerusalem, and all this wisdom he had, he didn't get it. Even there was the Queen of Sheba? There's a queen that comes and she talks to Solomon, and she is just amazed at how much wisdom he has. She's from a whole different culture. People came from all over the world to meet him and to see what he had and to see what he knew. And yet, it still wasn't enough, okay? He could have been listening to that song by Mick Jagger. I still got no satisfaction, okay? It still was there. So verse 10 says, "All that my eyes asked for, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any gladness, for my heart was glad because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor." So anything he saw, he got. Anything he wanted, he had. And it still wasn't enough. It still wasn't where the peace was. And he didn't withhold his heart from any gladness, from any pleasure, from any joy of any of the senses right there. And one thing it does point out that his heart was glad because of his labor. That is the thing that we're gonna see again in Ecclesiastics over and over again, is when you're actually doing something, that's when the joy is. All right, I can think about golf. Now, after golf, people make fun of me. They talk bad about me. I went golfing with a guy from my work, and everybody at the hospital's like, "Oh, I heard you could use some golf lessons. Oh, I heard this and that." I hear it all the time. I'm like, "Oh, man." But that day when I golfed, I sure did like golfing. It was so fun, and I had a good time, and I remember that, and I enjoyed it. But it went away after that day. It was like during the labor is when it was. I can think about times when I was a kid, and I got to do construction work for a bricklayer, and they would build basements and brick fronts and chimneys, and we would feel good that we took where there was nothing and we made something. And it was like, wow, this is something good. And it was in that labor that we felt like, wow, this is good. And we took joy in that time. But after a while, I don't keep thinking about that house or something like that. It's in the moment. It's like joy in the moment, and then it goes, So it's like in the bit of the moment. But there is something to be said about taking joy in your labor, because we all still work, we do things. And And there is reward for our labor, is that joy that we get when we do our labor. All right, and then something I wanted to point out, I wrote on here, Solomon's privileges. He had tons of privileges. He was a privileged man through and through. And he had no limitations. No one ever said no to Solomon. He had everything he wanted. There were nobody saying no. And the reward idea shows that we are to be content with what we have and enjoy that. Because he said, in the end, it was the reward falls labor. We got to find contentment with what we have and enjoy it. All right. And there's another example. I read about this example. I liked it. Think about a potter. And a potter makes this beautiful pot, on the spinning thing and everything. And the pot's so nice. And he enjoys it and he loves it. And then later it falls over and shatters and breaks. And it is no more. And truly, that's like everything one day is going to be. Nothing lasts forever, no matter what. Even if you got some beautiful pot that every time you look at it, you bring joy and think, wow, I remember making that pot and it looks so wonderful, so good. But in time, it's not going to last forever. I mean, if you go to the museum in Cleveland here, I highly recommend. There's an art museum. It's beautiful. I think it's still free too. We went and it was really nice. But you sometimes see like some pottery from 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago that somehow made it through that much time. And you just look at it and wonder. I mean, if you would just see it without knowing it's 4,000 years old, you think, what's that piece of junk? Maybe. That's what you might think, But when you know it's that old, you're like, wow. But you know what? The folks that made it aren't around no more to enjoy it or to see it. But it's just something. And God talks about him being the potter as well, too, and us being the clay. But in time, everything goes away. And then it says in the last verse I'm preaching today, last verse, I have a couple more things to say, but this is the last verse for our passage. Ecclesiastes 2:11. Thus I turned to all my works which my hands had done, and the labor which I had labored to do, behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was no advantage under the sun. Doesn't that sound sad? It sounds like suicidal, It sounds like if you're trying to look for this for life, and this is where you put all your hope, in the end, it's like Ernest Hemingway with that old man in the sea. That he wrote that book kind of reflecting the story of his own life. Is everything he did, the greatest fish, this and that, when he pulls it up, it was already eaten by sharks mostly right there. And this is what he found as he did his pursuit of pleasure. And he was a man that could do it, okay? Like I said, he had all the ladies. He had all the monies right there. He had all the power. And it wasn't enough. And it did not bring him peace. I wrote at the top, the quest was futile. That is to say, the ultimate meaning in life, the highest good to which we should give ourselves is not pleasure. It's not pleasure. And hopefully no one here is putting pleasure as the highest good of their life. Pleasure apart from God is grasping for the wind. And just imagine trying to catch the wind. That's harder than trying to catch a cat right there, okay? At least you might be able to catch a cat. But imagine trying to catch the wind. All right? You catch some wind and you want it to blow and you realize, oh, golly, it's not blowing anymore now. It's just air, And that's what happens. And pleasure apart from God is grasping for the wind. All is passing and temporary. It's the state of man, and man cannot fix it or change it. There's nothing that we can do. We shouldn't think that we can be better than Solomon, and somehow we're able to find something Solomon couldn't find. The book of Ecclesiastics really puts this in plain print, black and white for us. We're not going to find it. Solomon didn't find it, and neither are we going to find it in anything outside of Jesus Christ. And this is the truth. I have a psalm here. Psalm 16:11 is what I put up for a slide. I wish I could show it to you. I will next week. I'll figure this out. Psalm 16:11 says, "You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever." So where is the joy and the pleasure found? In Jesus Christ, in God. And how long does it last? It's not fleeting. It's not temporary. It doesn't come and go. It's not like the day I golfed and I just remember how good I felt that day. And it's there forever and ever in God, in Christ. And this is where it is, in God. And there's nothing to show for pleasure at the end of the day, but the deceitfulness of sin leads men to think the problem was they did not get enough of the pleasure. This is what happens. We think we didn't get enough of the pleasure. And that's why That's why you hear some folks are married like 6 times or something, and they keep thinking this is going to happen or that's going to happen different, and they find out it's not there, okay? It's not there. It's not, it's sin that leads us to think that the problem is we didn't get enough, that somehow we didn't get enough of what it was, I told you a few weeks ago how I had some good prime rib once with my brother-in-law. It was so good. And I had 3 pounds of it, I think. I mean, I ate a lot that day. It was gluttony, okay? It wasn't some good thing. But I ate so much. And at the end, I almost started to feel sick because I ate too much right there, And here I just wanted more of that pleasure. But then eventually, the pleasure turned something bad. Because I just wanted more because it tasted so good. But then I started feeling bad and not so good. And this is the way it is. But it's sin that makes us think that we can just get a little bit more and then it's going to be okay. If we just had a better job, if we had a little bit more money, if we had this or we had that, then things would be good. But this is what the Bible's telling us is it won't be. It can't be. So instead of wasting our time in the pursuit of stuff away from God, we should be spending our time pursuing God and searching after Him. And that's where real joy and pleasure is found. And Daniel 4:30 is a good example of a fellow just like this. Daniel 4:30, King Nebuchadnezzar, he looks over all of Babylon and he says, look what I have made. Look at what I have done. And you know what the next few verses say? God strikes him down and makes him like an animal for 7 years. And his hair grows long and his nails grow long and he eats like grass in the field. He goes totally insane is what God brings him to do when he tries to take this glory for himself. We can't take any glory for ourselves. All glory is God's glory. And God struck him down. And truly, it was a true mercy that God struck him down, because depending on how you read it and think about it, in the end of that 7 years, he gives praise to God. And it seems like he's a repentant fellow. And think about that, a totally wicked pagan king who had done things like on the level of Putin, on the level of Hitler, and yet he becomes a believer, it looks like, at the end of that, as that Babylonian king. So God's mercy was upon him to make him go crazy for those 7 years and to teach him the lesson, to bring him to the place of humility and to be humble. Now I have a couple slides that look like the boring slides. They're just words, okay? Maybe this is better than not up there, because you won't know all these boring slides are up there. But there's 2 lessons only. There's 2 lessons today, is what this fella Charles Simeon said. I don't know if you guys know who Charles Simeon was, but Charles Simeon was a good guy, and he said the 2 lessons are to enjoy God in everything and to enjoy everything in God. It's kind of catchy, isn't it? Enjoy God in everything and to enjoy everything in God. That's what we should take away from this today. This is where our pleasure should be, enjoying God in everything we do. We can enjoy God in our work. We can enjoy God in the day that we go to golf. We can enjoy God in all these kind of things. And then as we think about everything, we can enjoy God as well, as we put our peace in God, and that's where real pleasure is at. In verse 3 to 8, we talked about today, was the pleasure test. In verse 9 to 11 were the results. And guess what the results were? Negative, okay? They didn't pass the pleasure test, all right? And that's trying to get everything they could. And verse 11 was the outcome, and it was greater than the positive in verse 9 to 10. In the positive in 9 to 10, he had a little bit of joy from his labor. He still had his wisdom about him. But the outcome in verse 11 was bigger, that it was all just vanity, if that's where you're looking, rather than to Christ. And Solomon found that the pleasure promises more than it can produce. It promises more than it can give. It's like advertisements. When you see advertisements on the TV and they say you just buy this car and you will be so happy, okay? Or if you just get this, you'd be so happy. Recently somebody told me, because I was talking about, maybe somebody in church even told me here, but it might have been Bill. He had to get going, he told me before, so he's not here right now. But he told me, I looked at these things like I'm thinking, I'm a guy that's always thinking like, how do I keep providing for the family, how to make things straight, and my house is all electric. So I was thinking, what do I do for some type of backup? And I thought about that Generac stuff, like these big batteries you put on the wall they sell. And somebody told me that guy's in major lawsuits right now, that none of that stuff is working right. And those things cost like $10,000 or something. And I maybe the person was wrong telling me this, but they told me there's big lawsuits going on, and the guy's on his way out, and that things aren't being like what he advertised them to be. And truly, that's just an example, but pleasure promises more than it can produce, okay? It promises all these things. You think about men with pleasure, with ladies, okay? There's not a lot of young fellas here, but all these fellas at one time used to be young at one time, so they can relate, okay? Ladies know men too. And think about this, is the guys always think they're going to get this most beautiful girl or something, and then in time, what happens? We all get a little bit older. We all keep getting older, okay? I won't go too far down this route. I get in big trouble. I did it once before and I got in trouble. But things don't remain the same. You know, I like the verse, the best verse for that kind of passage is Proverbs 31, and it says, beauty is vain, okay? That it's fleeting. But a woman who loves the Lord, now that is to be valued. That's the treasure right there. And that's where men should be looking as well too. Rather than looking down the routes of pleasure, they should be looking to that. And truly, men, as we choose our wives and as we get married, we should only be choosing believers, Christians, people who love the Lord. That's what really matters in the end, okay? Absolutely, that's what really matters. But like I said, Solomon found it. The pleasure promises more than it can produce. Its advertising agency is better than its manufacturing department. All right, and that's how it is these days, trying to get our monies, right? It holds out the possibility of exquisite delight, but the best it can perform is titillation. You know, it just moves back and forth a little bit. It's like a top that's going to fall over. It seeks to tickle the human spirit, but cannot probe its depth. It daubs iodine on human wounds, but what's really needed is surgery. My usual saying for that is, it's a Band-Aid on a shotgun wound. That's all it is. Imagine if you had a shotgun wound and somebody said, oh, let me give you a Band-Aid. You're like, that's not going to be enough. Right? That's all that this stuff is if we think pleasure is going to fill the hole, the gap in our lives. It may distract us from our problems, but diverts our attention. But it cannot free us from those problems. And like I said, Ernest Hemingway kills himself right here after all these works and being such a well-known author. This is a big slide, so I'm not going to take long at it, okay? Living for pleasure has another snare. Pleasure satisfies only during the act. Repetition is the key to pleasure. One drink, one sexual fling, one contest won, one project accomplished, one wild party. None of these nor all of them put together can be enough to bring satisfaction. The quest for pleasure is like eating salted peanuts. It's almost impossible to stop after the first bite. And I could say that with more than peanuts. I could say with any kind of chocolate. It's almost impossible to stop after the first bite. All right? One bite leads to another because the first leaves no lasting impact. To reflect on the delights of the first peanut is far less gratifying than to reach for the second. Far from comforting us, each act of pleasure leaves us thirsty for the next. One of the wealthy celebrities of our generation has acknowledged this. My attention span is short, and probably my least favorite thing to do is to maintain the status quo. Instead of being content when everything is going fine, I start getting impatient and irritable. For me, the important thing is the getting, not the having. One other snare needs mentioning. The pursuit of pleasure results in either boredom or frustration. Put simply, if we gain the pleasure we seek, we soon become tired of it. If we do not gain it, we are filled with disappointment. Those who give themselves to pleasure are often bored. Those who wish they could and cannot are often bitter. So what does it bring ultimately? Boredom. For people who are only pleasure seekers, they're bored with everything because they don't find the answer. When pleasure snares are examined, we can see why the preacher reached his negative conclusion. If you're looking for a foundation on which to build your life, do not count on pleasure. It does not have the permanence to sustain you. 1 or 2 days a year are all we can take, even of something as beckoning as the county fair. You know, and this guy talked about if you ever go to the fair, how fun it is, right? Remember those days when you were younger, you went to the fair, and you got some cotton candy, and you got to ride some rides, and there's all this stuff, and they got to throw some darts at some balloons and win a stuffed animal or something, or I always like that one when you shoot the air gun, you know, you knock the star out or something, okay? There's all those little fun things at the fair, but imagine that that's all that ever went on. Think about being a carny, you know, being a person that worked the fair. What kind of life would that be? It'd be like living in a trailer park or something that's having a hard time with things. If you just worked the fair and that's all you ever did, you wouldn't really have that much fun with it. Imagine how your health would be if all you ate was cotton candy, you know? If all you ate was hot dogs. Lately I eat a lot of hot dogs to my son right there. But think about that. Eventually it would wear out. It was more than 1 or 2 days a year. What a hollow and futile life would be to be locked within its gates permanently. The booths, the contests, the amusements that seem so enticing on rare occasions would cloy and nauseate us to a steady diet. It would just be terrible for us. It'd be like watching a horror movie. And you know, watch some horror movie where you're just caught in the fair and you can never leave the fair. It'd be like a Twilight Zone episode where you went to enjoy the fair and then you found out you can never leave the fair. You'd be like, oh no, I can see it played out. But that's what it is when you just pursue pleasure in life. That's just what that is. And then I got this slide at the top is my most important question of all for you. Do you love Jesus more than all else? That's what really matters. Do you love Jesus more than your pleasure? Do you love Jesus more than anything else in this world or in your life? Because this is the meaning of life. Throughout Ecclesiates, he keeps searching for what's the meaning of life. The meaning of life is to love Jesus Christ. It's far greater and far deeper than any pleasures of this world, loving Jesus. And it was a good warning that the preacher gave us. Even the richest, wisest, most accomplished of us will end up in futility if pleasure is our aim. To move beyond futility, we must go another route. It was Jesus, the greater than Solomon, who showed us the way, and it is a way that stands in sharp contrast to the preacher's path of pleasure. Pleasure there will be, Jesus promised, but it's not found by those who make seeking it their chief aim. True happiness will not come apart from sharing Christ's suffering. When we share Christ's suffering, that's where we really find our happiness. Who are the happy and blessed ones? Jesus answered this was plain. He said, those who are poor in spirit, who mourn, who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness, who are persecuted for Christ's sake as they take up their cross and follow him. It's in Matthew 5, 1-12. And the true joy that Jesus promised will not be found apart from serving Christ's purposes. Not food, nor drink, nor raiment are our ultimate concern. For after all these things the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. So instead of seeking all that stuff, seek Jesus first. And as you seek him, he'll provide for you. To do God's work was why Christ came. There is no path beyond futility that does not merge with Christ's own way. And most important, the true pleasure that Jesus promised will not be ours apart from loving Christ's person. When it comes down to it, what gives us the fullest pleasure is not recreation, entertainment, or accomplishment. It is fellowship. It is the intimate sharing of time, thoughts, experiences, and feelings with those for whom we care. Dutiful slaves and graceful dancing girls, charming gardens and lavish buildings, rich food and challenging games, all of these are no competition for the shared delight of time we spend with the one we love. And the one we love is Jesus. It's above all of that. Beyond futility to pleasure, only then we can give the right answers to the question that Jesus posed to Peter. Do you love me more than these? You remember when Jesus said that to Peter at the end of the book of John, after Peter had betrayed him, denied him, swore to God that he did not know him, to the other fellows. And what did Jesus come back and say? Do you love me more than these? This is where it's all about. Do we love Jesus more than anything else? To give the wrong answer is to be as foolish as a grown man who lingers over cotton candy at the county fair when his wife is waiting at home with the promises of intimate and satisfying love. I like that. We're married men, right? All right, but this is the thing, I'd rather be with my wife than be the cotton candy too long, But here's the thing. And in heaven, it's going to be better than that. My kids asked me that yesterday. One of the kids asked me that, would there be like sexual stuff in heaven? And I don't think there will be. I think in heaven, it will be beyond that type of joy all the time with no longing more or anything. There's nothing in this earth that can be imagined to how wonderful heaven will be, and there'll be no tiredness of heaven. There won't be anybody singing, I don't get no satisfaction. That'll be the song in hell, okay? That'll be the song in hell. It won't be the song in heaven, okay? It won't be the song in heaven, because in heaven, it's where everything is fulfilled. It's where God is, and it is as perfect can be. And probably the best thing of all in heaven is there's no sin in heaven. No deceitful sin that makes you think, I need a little more of this, or I need a little more of that, or all these kind of things that draw us aside and mess us up so badly. And that's my last slide, okay? If you're watching the slideshow, it has ended. All right? But right now I'm going to go to communion. And you know what's bad is I usually have a timer, so I have no idea how long I went for time. It's probably about the same, though. But, all right, I'm sorry. But we're gonna hit communion now. I'll get my young man up here to grab it.